alphabetically.
I'm
So-
usually first.
So alphabetically, the order will be Nancy Agnew, then Sam,
Yeah, that's right.
then Ed, then me, then Caroline, then Todd, and then Nancy Wirth.
Perfect.
Got it? And I can prompt you. All right. So good morning. It's Friday, January 15th, 2021. The purpose of this recording is to document the early history of Cornerstones community partnerships. I'm Tracey Enright, the executive director, and I'm going to have all the participants introduce themselves. Nancy Agnew.
I'm Nancy Agnew. I understand this is being recorded. That's fine. And I'm speaking to you from my daughter Emma's old bedroom in Topanga Canyon, California.
Sam
Baca. I was the first community coordinator, I think maybe the only one, for Churches Symbols of Community, the predecessor of Cornerstones. I also understand that this is being recorded, and I consent to that. Native of Santa Fe, still living here in Santa Fe. Worked with Cornerstones from Churches Symbols of Community in 87, I guess it was, to about 2001.
Great. Ed.
Ed Crocker. Yes, I consent to this being recorded for Cornerstones. I am in Santa Fe, like Sam, born here, been here all my life. Never left Santa Fe.
I'm Tracey Enright, the executive director of Cornerstones. I do understand and consent to this being recorded, and I am in Santa Fe, New Mexico. Caroline.
I'm Caroline Little. I consent to this being recorded. I'm in Uzès, France, and I'm the vice chair of Cornerstones. I've been on the board for a couple of years.
Todd.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Todd Sickles. I consent to this recording. I am the current board chair at Cornerstones, and I am currently in Cave Creek, Arizona.
And Nancy Wirth.
Hi, I'm Nancy Wirth, and I consent to being recorded. In fact, I heartily endorse the idea. I think it's so great to have this become an archive. I was the founding board chair and on the board for 12 years, I guess, and am now the head of the advisory council. So why don't we just let the old timers maybe each have 5 minutes or so or less to give us some idea of what, how they fit in here or how we fit in. And let's start with Nancy Agnew. Nancy Arnon Agnew.
Thank you, Nancy. I want to take you back to the 1980s. Of course, Sam and Ed, Nancy, you were all here then. Those of you who were in Santa Fe at the time probably remember in the 1980s, there was a lot of public worry and anxiety about the beautiful churches. And let me say immediately, the concern among many people were not just the structures themselves, but rather the communities whose faith and dedication and artistry these really beautiful, irreplaceable structures embodied and symbolized. In 1985, Susan Cable Herder, who we all love, was chair of the New Mexico Community Foundation. She and the foundation decided to do something about this very urgent problem, especially brought to their attention by a painter who some of you may remember, Harold Joe Waldron, or who painted the old churches. And he was aghast because he noticed as he was painting them, they were crumbling. They were derelict. One of his favorites that he painted in El Valle collapsed before he could save it. But there were formidable obstacles, and where to begin? No one knew how many churches there were in the state, ironically. No one knew the condition of each of these churches. There's always the problem of money, funding. That this New Mexico Community Foundation was small organization back then. There were, I don't know how to phrase this, but maybe some political challenges, because the archdiocese, quite understandably, didn't really feel comfortable with outsiders at that time, sort of a bunch of well-to-do Anglos in Santa Fe barging in and interfering with their structures for which they had to pay the insurance. There were all sorts of question marks. Where would one begin with this large problem? I feel that the Church's Symbols of Community program, as it came to be known, really was born not just on a lucky star, but about 10 lucky stars. Those stars took various forms. One we're looking at right now, or I'm looking at you, Nancy. You can't look at well, I guess you can look at yourself. One was in the form of Nancy Wirth and her just blessed mother, Faith Meme, who became crucial donors and leaders of the project. Another lucky star was leadership for the program in the form of Susan Cable Herder. Susan, as I think all of you know, had worked many years in Washington. She had a large network of contacts and a brilliance about organizing. She decided that the best thing to do would be to get a planning grant from the National Endowment for the Arts. And in 1985, under the aegis, of course, of the board, she hired Susanna Aldi, who some of us know and remember, to write the first grant to the NEA. It was a planning grant. And Susie described to me how she and Bruce Rellstadt, then director, would sit and in a cafe and sort of say, well, what are we asking for? How can we possibly begin to approach this problem? But they came up under Susan's direction with a strategy. And in 1986, that grant from the National Endowment for the Arts was funded in the spring. And I would add, the National Endowment for the Arts has been crucial to the program. They gave us generously every year for at least 7 years a continuing grant. They were very important. One of the first things that needed to be done was to drop an inventory of these churches. And there's another lucky star of the program came in, which is the amount of volunteer workers that entered the program. Barbara Zook, and as a volunteer who worked for the National, who worked for the State Preservation Office at the time, volunteered along with some paid staff to go around New Mexico and document every single church. And Tracey, I know in your files and Todd and so forth, that there will be that original inventory of the churches, which took more than a, thank you. How nice to see that. That's how the inventory came about. I would say one of the biggest lucky stars was the staff that began to join the Church's Symbols of Community program as funds began to come in. Thanks to Faith Meme, who matched dollar for dollar our first grant to National Trust for Historic Preservation, we finally had enough money to hire someone who could go out and work in communities. That was Sam Baca. And if you'll forgive, and I'm probably running over my 5 minutes, so I'm just going to end with 2 quick anecdotes about Ed and Sam, because they're such absolutely irreplaceable, unmatchable key people of the Church's project. When we got the National Trust grant, Susan and I thought, well, we've got to advertise but for a position, but we didn't want the Archdiocese to know yet we were doing this until we had proceeded further along in our relationship and we could explain, that we weren't going to step on any toes. So we wrote the most cryptic ad you can imagine for the New Mexican. It said something like, community organizing position, very important, write such and such. There was no email then if you're interested. Well, we got a card back in the mail from someone named Sam Baca. And it said very judiciously, very carefully, it said something like, Dear Box 4578, the response, I might be interested in this position, depending on what it is. So I met with Sam in the dining room of the Old Hilton Hotel. And I came armed with a crucial piece of information, which was Sam had happened to note in his resume that he had worked on or helped form or started the Big Brothers Big Sisters program, working with a close friend of mine, Deborah Douglas. So when I got this card from Sam, I just picked up the phone. I can see where I was when I did this. And I said, Deborah, we have this card back from someone named Sam Baca. What can you tell me about him? I have to tell you what Deborah Douglas said, because I'll never forget it. There was a moment of stunned silence. And then she said, Sam, she said, he's one of the most wonderful people I've met in my life. She said, go grab him. She said, he's incredible, grab him. So we did. To the success of the program. Little, we didn't know it at the time. Ed, I'm going to say something, Ed, and you can throw a wad of paper at me if you don't like this, but this is my recollection. You volunteered to help the program. We didn't have enough money to pay you then. And one day I got a call from Suzanne. Susan had asked me to be the first director. I got a call from Suzanne Jameson at the Historic Guadalupe Foundation. And she said, Nancy, I need a pious fool to go up on the cupola, do you say, of the church and fix the cross. It's falling over and I can't find a contractor who has the courage and the know-how to take on this project. It needs some other work. And Ed said, when I told Ed this, he said, well, I'm going to be Suzanne's pious fool. And he got up on the roof of the historic Guadalupe church. And a couple of days after he did that, I got a call from Suzanne. She said, he was wonderful. Where did you find this man? He's incredible. And she went on to enumerate, not only had Ed done this and that, but he knew about Adobe, he understood crumpling, he could advise them on where they should go on the foundation. So that was Ed, who became, as all of you know, an absolutely irreplaceable, matchless, not only contractor, but more than that, someone who could make members of the community, which were always our focus, feel totally comfortable, not patronized, not talked down to. So with Sam and Ed on board, we were off. And I'm going to close right there. Sorry, Nancy, if I went over 5 minutes.
Thank you, Nancy. That was beautiful. Really just perfect.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Thank you.
And what I didn't say to start with is how much we miss having Susan Herter here for this particular roundtable. She is so key to the entire.
Absolutely.
We have to get her at a later date for sure.
I do want to add, because I meant to say it, in those first days, there really wasn't enough money to even keep things going. And I remember many times Susan opened her personal checkbook and either wrote me a paycheck or some expense that the program had, and it came out of her pocket. And she's modest. She doesn't talk about that, but it should be acknowledged.
You would be very embarrassed to hear you say that.
Oh, I'm sorry, Susan. You can cut that out. I mean, you can delete it, Tracey.
Sam, you want to carry on from here, just kind of chronologically?
Me? Yeah, sure. I remember very well that meeting to find out what this kind of an ad I was responding to. But right after Nancy's and my first meeting, Nancy invited me to come to the old New Mexico Community Foundation offices on San Francisco and Guadalupe, the tiny little office where we all started Churches Symbols of Community. And Nancy and Susan explained to me the concept of the program, and which to me was just, from the very start, was just this incredible magical idea of working on the churches as a way of building community, because that was always the aim of Churches Symbols of Community. What an apt name it was, because that's exactly what was happening. The deterioration of the church was really a result of and symbolized the decline of the communities. Younger people having to leave and work in larger communities, leaving the communities with older populations less capable of maintaining the churches. So it was everything, like Nancy said, it was just this, all of these things happening at one time that was really critical. The churches, the survey of the churches was really important because it categorized them into three categories. First priority being the parish churches that had resident pastors. The second category being churches that were still used, but only as missions of the parish churches. And the third category, churches that were no longer active. So Churches Symbols of Community made the conscious decision to work on the number 2 and the number 3 churches. And my first job as community coordinator was to go out and make contacts with communities that really, where we knew that there were issues with the church itself. And again, the whole idea was to kind of restore traditions of community cooperation that built the churches in the first place, and that succeeding generations continued in order to maintain the churches. And so meeting with community people, the first thing we really realized was the incredible dedication that they had to the work of their ancestors. These were churches that were built by their great grandparents, maintained in succeeding generations all the way up to now. And so just the knowing that they could get some help with restoring this really precious symbol of their community was something that they really welcomed. And at first we did preservation plans with volunteers like Victor Johnson, Jake Rodriguez, Barbara Zook. But really we needed a lot more than preservation plans. We really needed to be able to give hands-on help. And Ed had already been on kind of just a full-time volunteer almost, working every Saturday on following up on these preservation plans and some of the very early projects like Rociada, Chacon, Pajarito, La Cueva. But I think it was in the late 80s, probably around 89, that I'll never forget, Susan, Nancy, and myself went on a site visit up to Chacon to look at the San Juan Nepomuceno church up there, which was really deteriorating. And we stopped at a picnic table, and I don't know if you remember this meeting, Nancy, it's so clear in my mind. We had just received the Skaggs grant, the Skaggs Foundation grant, which was sizable and which was the funding that allowed us to hire Ed. And really, hiring Ed was one of the milestones of Cornerstones, because when he came on full time, we were able to actually provide a lot of hands-on assistance to the communities that we had been, talking to about helping. But one of the things that's really important to emphasize is our whole model and our whole approach at the time. When communities would come to us, word got out is the other thing. And so a lot of communities were coming to us. the first thing that we had to establish with the community is a commitment on their part to take the, leadership, ownership and leadership of the project, and be able to come out and commit to Saturday work days every Saturday, making it very clear that we were not an organization that was going to come in and do a project for them. They were going to have to provide as much manpower as they possibly could muster. And sometimes that was in the form of former residents who were coming back from Albuquerque and Santa Fe, working on weekends on the Saturday work days. But once Ed was able to begin to work with communities on a full-time basis, with the planning of the project and the implementation, we could bring a lot of resources like our equipment, our scaffolding, our mixers, our all of our other equipment. But the real key to the success, I thought, of those early projects was Ed's ability to work so sensitively with communities to elicit the leadership of the elders that were there, that still remembered the traditional skills of preserving the buildings, and keeping the project owned by the community and led by the community, but providing critical support that they couldn't have done without. And that was really magical. The early projects that I mentioned, Rociada, Chacon, La Cueva, the people in those communities was incredible. Pajarito is a perfect example. Now, when Elvira Vigil Ogard came to our office and told us about the church in Pajarito that was really deteriorating, was just about to fall apart. Barbara Zook had done an assessment of the church and determined that it needed immediate stabilization. Well, the community, there was no community anymore. Pajarito had been, it was basically a ghost town, surrounded by both pueblos. That all of the property around there that was the community of Pajarito had been repatriated to the pueblo of San Ildefonso back then. So there was no community, and I explained that to Elvie. We need to be able to work with the community. Well, she said, we have all the former residents who are living in Santa Fe and in Española, in Las Vegas and Albuquerque, who are willing to come back and work on it. And so Ed, said, we decided we would help them stabilize the church. And once it was stabilized, if they continued to provide the volunteer effort, we would continue to work with them. And in one of the fastest projects that happened, I think it had to probably happen in about 2 years, they would continue to come out in droves, and we were able to work with them to completely restore that church in a matter of about 2 years. So that was kind of the excitement of those early days. We just getting into the Cornerstones era. By 1990, we had already by far outgrown the office on Guadalupe Street, and Nancy had bought the building on Otero Street where Cornerstone still lives, and that was really also a milestone because we were able to expand. As Steve Peart came on as the second technical staff person. I'm not sure when that happened, but it was probably in the early 90s. And as a result, we were able to expand into many more communities. In the late 80s, early 90s, we worked with just, I don't know, probably about 70 or 80 projects, all church restoration projects. Later, Cornerstones expanded, and Ed will talk more about what we did, where we went from just the church projects to training youth and all of the other things that happened in the early days of Cornerstones. And I think I've probably gone over my 5 minutes. So.
Thanks, Sam. That's great. Just a little heads up. We now have Elvie's daughter Suzanne on the board,
Mhm.
which is very nice continuity.
Yes.
Okay, Ed, you want to pick it up from there?
Certainly, I have to say to Nancy Agnew that what she succeeded in doing when she approached me at the Santuario de Guadalupe was to take me from a well-paying job to a non-paying job, which lasted for about 2 years, as I recall. You know, Saturdays, some Sundays, and that kind of thing over the course of about 2 years. But I have to say that it was a very exciting time, and I would do it all over again. I remember very clearly the first project that I really got involved in was Chacon, and driving with Nancy on a very cold winter's day up through that lugubrious canyon from taking the high road, and then coming into Chacon and having a meeting with the mayordomo, who was Mary Romero. And she and her father, Don Pedro, was there as well. And he had been the prior mayordomo, who had in fact been the one who had led the plastering of the church with cement. And it was that act of plastering it with cement that led to not just that church having problems, but that was the case with most of the churches. Adobe can get wet, it can get even very wet. Sun comes out, it dries out, and it's fine. But if you encase it in plaster, as we all know, the moisture is retained, and over time, walls begin to slump. And that was happening at Chacon. And I remember that meeting with Don Pedro, who had put the plaster on or had organized it in his day, and explaining to Mary, who was the new mayordomo, that it really had to come off. That put her in a very difficult position because she was going to have to undo the work that her father in good faith had done. But in the spirit of community and the way that those communities work, he said, it's your choice. And when the time came when the work began in the spring, he swung the first blow to take that plaster off. And I think that really symbolizes, in large part what the communities mean. It's family, it's faith, it's independence, it's all of those things. So we went on, and forgive me, Sam, but isn't that a San Antonio church? It's not San Juan Nepomuceno, it's San Antonio in Chacon.
San Antonio de Padua in Chacon?
Yeah.
San Antonio.
Yeah, San Antonio, yeah. Well, anyway, from there we went on to another project at Rociada, where they had a wall that had completely collapsed. We got the church stabilized on December 23rd, as I recall, snowing like hell. It was just absolutely freezing and miserable. But as a result of that, one of the people who was there to help us during the shoring was Antonio Martinez. And he became also a very important member of the staff of both churches and Cornerstones. So now to expand a little bit, when the tail began to wag the dog and CSOC had basically outgrown the New Mexico Community Foundation, and Nancy had provided the big new space for us on Otero Street, we had a meeting that happened on the Day of Atonement. And I remember I had been somehow appointed to chair a meeting to decide on the name for the new entity. Sam, you remember that? Susie Aldi was there. Nancy, I think you might have been there. Sam was certainly there. And I remember the one thing that I did to get the meeting going was say, okay, this is the Day of Atonement. What does that mean? And I wrote on a board, at one meant. So we're going to come together and we're not leaving this room until we have a name. And out of that meeting came Cornerstones Community Partnerships. We expanded very soon after that and got into the Pueblos. We had a call from Zuni Pueblo. They had problems with their church. They still have major problems with their church. And I went down there to do an assessment and to begin some of the work that needed to be done on the church. And it was really there that we got very deeply into youth training. And one of the things that we learned early on in the project at Zuni, which lasted 6 years, and I lived in Middle Village for 3 of those years, was that really to have a successful program in youth training, you need to create a presence in the community. You need to be there and be committed to it over the long haul. And what happened at Zuni, with Susan's disapproval, Susan Herder, she didn't think we should be spending that kind of time with the tribes. I think she was more concerned about the Hispanic communities in northern New Mexico, although she did come around to it very strongly after a while. But one of the things that we did down there in the youth training was we reopened the historic stone quarries. And that led over the course of those 6 years to a complete renewal or restoration of the stone Middle Village, which had deteriorated over time to cinder block, galvanized tin, just a mishmash of stuff around the main dance plaza. And as a result of that project of reopening the quarry and training about 120 kids in stonemasonry by 2 elders that we were able to conscribe, we did manage to change the face of Zuni Pueblo, which I think is very worthwhile. It was a wonderful thing to do. The youth training, I have to say, was of only moderate success. We didn't have any place for those kids to go when they came out of the youth training program. A couple of them did work with the tribe on building an elder center in the Pueblo, but that only lasted for about a year. And I was very disappointed that we hadn't anticipated what we were going to do with these trained kids once they came out of the program. I think that was a major failing on our part. We did have one student, Calvin Chimney, who went on to the National Park Service and has retired from there now. So there were some highlights in it. Yeah, can you believe that, Sam? He did his 25 years plus. Things that I think that you get the idea now about how the thing developed. And I have to say that I guess the 12 years that I was with Cornerstones were among the best years of my life. It was just an exciting, wonderful, vibrant thing to have done.
Amen.
I think I've also gone over my 5 minutes, Nancy. You can slap my hand.
Oh, no, not at all. Everybody has just given us, all the 3 of you have given us such wonderful insight into not just the chronology of the history, but really the excitement about starting this little organization. And I will be very, very brief with my own comments. In that I started with the New Mexico Community Foundation. I think Susan Herder asked me to be on that foundation because of my interest in preserving my own dad's buildings. So I was very involved in doing that at the time. But before I knew it, I had become the head of the foundation program called Churches, Symbols of Community. And I didn't really realize where that was going to lead. I really didn't at all, but was present when Susan came to ask my mother to match the NEA grant. And I kind of perked up my ears at that. But quite a bit of time went by before I got really involved. And I'll never forget Sam and Ed, and I think Nancy, you were there, but I can't quite remember if you were or not, came up to my house and said, we want you to be involved in this new organization that we're thinking about, and we have a name for it. And they told me that they had decided on Cornerstones community partnerships. And I particularly loved the community partnerships part of it. That was really important. And so then I guess I agreed to gather together some people, and you guys are going to have to help me a little bit. I probably should have gotten Jean to pull out the first minutes of the board, but some of the people that I could remember were on that were the very beginning, maybe not necessarily the very first board members, but there was Skip Helms and Bill Thornton, and of course Joan Baker, who's now on our advisory board, which is great, and a great guy named Bill Wardell, who was very enthusiastic and had some great financial resources to help us. But there were quite a lot of other people that seemed to have strained out of my mind in the process. But it was really good, and I was the board chair for 2 years, 1994 to 6, I think. And there was a big gap in there between 1986, when this whole thing started, and the time when we actually set up a new board. But I think that's how long it took, and that's how I always think of the inception of Cornerstones starting when I took over the role of being the board chair, but actually it was very nearly, well, it was 8 years earlier that happened. So now I think it would be wonderful if the new board chair and the new vice board chair and our new executive director asked some questions of the 3 people that were so instrumental in starting this. So go for it.
Tracey, do you want to start?
I have a couple here. I was told to ask about, there's a story floating around that some important decision got made by a coin flip in the very beginning. Can anyone confirm a story about a decision being made using a flip of a coin? No? Okay, we're starting off well, aren't we? Well, actually what I can confirm is that that may be totally legend if no one really knows about it. And apparently there were some trips to New York and DC as things were getting started. Are there any stories from your travels together?
Oh, there's lots of stories.
1993, yeah.
Well, I think one of the reasons New York was a big kind of destination for us at the beginning is the fact that Susan was a personal friend of Eugene Thaw, and I think most of you probably know who Eugene Thaw was. He decided to move to New Mexico and actually brought his foundation here, the Thaw Charitable Trust, and established an $81 million foundation here based in Santa Fe, which Susan ran at the beginning. But Gene Thaw helped connect us with several New York resources, the Henry Luce Foundation, the World Monuments Fund, the Andy Warhol Foundation. So in those early years, it was my very pleasant task to go out and visit some of the boards of those foundations and take slideshows of our incredible churches. And just, of course, they all fell in love with them, just like everybody does, and provided a lot of our early funding. Those foundations, and along with others, provided a lot of our early funding. That's why we would go to New York fairly often. Then also there was another resource that came out of that was Raymond Sokoloff, who was the entertainment editor for the Wall Street Journal. And so on one of our trips, Ed, myself, and Susan Herder had a meeting with Raymond Sokoloff at the World Financial Center across from the World Trade Center. And Ed and I happened to we were up at the Andy Warhol Foundation meeting there, took a cab downtown from the Andy Warhol was in Midtown, took a cab downtown to the World Financial Center, where our meeting was. We were a little bit late for it, fortunately, because 10 minutes after we got there, the first World Trade Center bombing happened right there across the street from where we were going to meet with Raymond Sokoloff. And Ed and I showed up, fortunately, a little bit late. Otherwise, we might have been hit by the flying glass from the explosion had we been on time. But that's one little anecdote that.
Well, Sam, tell about the taxi driver.
Oh my God!
Don't spare the language.
We had a Haitian taxi driver who was taking us from probably 24th Street or so down to town to the World Financial Center, and he was swearing, shit, God damn it, shit, God damn it. He'd keep swearing because as we were driving down there, ambulances. There must have been 20 ambulances that pulled us over on the way to the center. Immediately, they just showed up in droves, and so he finally stopped about a block from our destination and told us, "You're better off walking the rest of the way." And so we did, and we went with Ed and I went up to the office. Susan had already arrived there. She was there at the entering the building at the time of the explosion. And so we all went up to Raymond Sokoloff's office. He canceled our lunch reservations, and we watched the evacuation of the World Trade Center from his office. Just one of our incredible experiences. The other one, and Ed can maybe talk about that. We were asked to build the Smithsonian institution, which we had established a relationship with, asked us to build the adobe wall for the American Encounters exhibit at the American History Museum. And Ed and I were fortunate enough to be able to go up there and build that wall on site at the American History Museum. Ooh. And Ed can probably add a little bit to that.
Although it just seemed ironic that we made the adobes here in Santa Fe. They wanted them authentic. They didn't want them made with New York soil or Washington soil or anything like that. They wanted authentic New Mexico soil. So we made a bunch of adobes and packed them in styrofoam and shipped them to the Smithsonian.
Yeah, well, I have to tell you, they call this guy from this East Coast guy from the Smithsonian said, we want an authentic adobe wall for this exhibit. And do you think you could, it's about the size of a doorway. He says, do you think you can build that and ship it to us? I had to explain to him, no, I don't think you'd get it like a box of crackers. You'd get crumbs if we tried to do that. And so he said, well, then what would it take? I said, well, we'd have to build it on site. And he said, okay. He said, okay, well, just work up a budget for me. So I worked up a budget, which included both Ed and myself going out to build it.
And Sam, a lot of martinis.
Yes.
Yeah, a few. But anyway, so I worked up this whole budget. And of course, whenever we took a trip out there, we would take advantage of it to be able to visit, to make several different visits at the same time. So we actually set up a whole schedule of visits that we would do while we were in Washington to build a wall. And so it was really cool because when we started building it, the whole exhibit was a construction site. It was they were building all the partitions and everything so there was dozens and dozens of Washington, D.C. construction workers who just gathered around us to say, what? you're building this thing out of mud, and you build buildings out of mud. And we said, yeah. And they said, well, do they last? Yeah, about 200 or 300 years. But it was amazing. We were on the evening news. They interviewed Ed on the evening news about what we were doing there, and
Wow.
but that was one of our adventures for sure.
If I could back up even
Tracey, Tracey, you know a little bit about all the Smithsonian requirements for exhibits, because that's one of your, was
Oh, wow.
in your past big time.
I'm sure that was quite an experience for all the fabricators who were there, seeing these different materials. And you may have had a conservator saying, wait, they're bringing dirt into the museum, or did they ask you like to control for pests or anything, or they just let you bring it?
No, but when we were done, they did put the trowel that we had used for the mud, they put that in the permanent collection.
And it was a permanent
America's attic. Yeah.
It was up there for probably 15, 20 years.
Yeah.
It was a permanent exhibit. So.
I think, was it there? And because we did a major renovation of American history in about 2003. Was it still up?
I think it would have been up then, yes.
Yeah.
Because permanent exhibits, I'm sure you would know, are usually up for about 15 years or so. In fact, I remember visiting the American History Museum later, and the exhibit still being up. So I'm sure in 2003 it was still there. It was called American Encounters.
Right. Yep.
Caroline?
I'm gonna let Todd and Caroline.
Yeah.
Caroline?
Well, I can only tell you, well, two things. Sam, do you habitually now show up for meetings late?
Do I?
Do you go to meetings late habitually now?
No, not usually. Sometimes. What?
I'm talking about your experience with the World Trade Center.
Oh my gosh. Okay, got
Yeah.
you.
No, and I just want to say that this time has just been incredibly interesting and inspirational, and I feel very honored to serve on this board and feel like I'm standing in very large shoes to fill, carrying the great work that you all have done forward, and it's really wonderful. So thank you.
You know, I would echo what Caroline says. Nancy, I appreciate you, and Tracey, I appreciate you having the idea of getting us all together. I think that Cornerstones right now is amassing the people and the talent to take this organization forward. We're going to be very aggressive in terms of fundraising and grant writing and ways to bring more activity under our umbrella. But what you all bring is an incredible sense of history and passion for this mission. And I think that the board members I work with, Tracey and her staff, all share that, but we don't understand it the way you do. So, you know, this hour of just you all listening to you reflect on the history and legacy of Cornerstones really, you know, engenders even more pride in me to be involved with this organization. I mean, its mission is just outstanding at so many different levels. And what I hope we're able to do coming out of this session is not just stop here, but to look for ways. And I've got some ideas that I'd like to share with Caroline and Tracey, and I think we need to run this back through Nancy, ways that we can engage on a more consistent basis and really learn from you and figure out how to get a lot of the passion from your stories out into the marketplace. Because, you know, in an area like Santa Fe, where there are so many nonprofit organizations, many of which are doing very, very, very good work, I don't think it's who screams the loudest. I think it's who tells the most compelling story that's going to attract, you know, the talent and the opportunities that we certainly want for the organization moving forward. So I'm looking forward to creatively thinking out of the box with all of you to figure out how we can sort of harness your historical understanding, your passion, your knowledge, your interest in helping us drive the organization forward, if that makes sense. So thank you for your time.
One thing that really came out to me from the stories of Ed and Sam and Nancy is the notoriety and importance of the foundations from which we were getting grants. And that, to me, is something that we absolutely have to replicate again. I mean, just the NEA alone, the amount of years that they supported us is an example that for into the future, I think that we should try to replicate.
Yeah.
Right on.
May I add from my end, when I got the email, maybe I've forgotten who sent it, about you, Tracey, you, Todd, you, Caroline, I just was exuberant. I was so thrilled because your backgrounds are extraordinary, and to bring that level of expertise into this program that we all love so much just was for me very moving and very memorable. And Nancy Wirth, I just have to say, looking at you, the number of wonderful occasions we had in that beautiful living room of yours where you would gather us all together and we would feast on enchilada and so forth. Those times really help knit everybody together in crucial ways. It's like a tree. You see the growth above ground, but it's nurtured by those underground roots. And you, through your many, many, many years of hands-on contributions of all sort, you've given us that stability. And I just remember the many times we might be feeling discouraged, if a grant, if things if there seemed obstacles, and you would walk in like sunshine to our office, first in Guadalupe, but then in our gorgeous quarters in Otero, and you just cheered us up and gave good advice and all sorts of things. That's invaluable. So special thanks to you.
Nancy, thank you for those words. They were incredibly kind and I think maybe overblown. But anyway, one of the things I think that it's going to be a challenge as Cornerstones moves forward. In the past, at the beginning, we had a very, very clear mission, and it was quite a well-defined, you could say small mission. It was a big mission, but it was clear to all of us exactly why we were doing what we were doing. And I think going forward, the challenge now becomes how to weave together all the different things that we're trying to do, including our big effort to get involved with solar energy, and it's more diffuse and I think maybe a little harder to go to New York and have all these wonderful appointments that come back with money and support. But I think that's one of the challenges going forward.
Yeah, Nancy, I mean, there are a number of challenges, but I view a lot of those challenges, and I think you would too, as opportunities. And with the right people involved and the collaboration that I think we have across the organization and the transparency and all of the just tremendous energy that I've seen in the organization over the past couple of months where I've been more fully engaged with others. I think we have a very, very bright future. I'm very bullish on this organization, not just the mission, which I think we're all very passionate about, but our ability to execute. And that's really what I'm thinking about. How do we execute against that mission? And with Tracey coming on board, who I think is absolutely essential to driving this organization forward, and I've had the privilege of working with her probably more than she would like over the course of the past month. We're very impressed with her. Caroline has been of incredible value in terms of helping me and others sort of figure out what our board development strategy is going to be, and some other very key aspects of the organization. I really think that 2021 and 2022 are going to be very, very interesting years for us. And again, I just want to reinforce that, you know, I don't think anybody in the organization feels we have all the answers, and we need to learn. We need other people's opinions and perspectives. And I would invite this group and the other advisors, Nancy, that sit on your council to interact with us, you know, through Caroline, as you know, as a point of contact on the board, and feed us ideas, kick the tires on ideas that you hear us developing, and work with us to really continue to make Cornerstones successful. Because I can tell you, as a board, as a staff, we're here to help you do that. And we know we want you to help us do that as well.
Well, I can't believe it, but we've come to an exact 1 hour. And I just want to thank you so much, Ed and Sam and Nancy, for being willing to dedicate this hour to us. And I kind of hope that the board and the staff will reach out to you if you're willing in future as we move forward. These can be, as you say, Todd, very, very exciting, challenging times, and we're gung-ho about this little organization. So many thanks, and let's
you
in some way.
Thank you. A privilege, really a privilege. Thank you.
All righty. Hasta la vista.
Thank you
Hasta
all.
la vista.
Hasta luego.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Everybody.
Bye
Have a
bye.
good weekend.
Okay, bye.
Bye.